By the way, that is the greeting here. Howdy back. Okay. Thank you for coming to our next installment of the Borlaug Seminar Series. Today we have a special treat for you because we have with us an individual who has just lots of experience working on the international development front. But the specific topic of his talk for you this afternoon is one that a lot of people may not know about, and that is what resilience can be and what it can do for these countries that are in conflict, and how it can help lift them out of poverty and hunger post-conflict, and hopefully do so in a way that is sustainable and make those communities resilient to future episodes and shocks that happen, to everybody, even here in the U.S. to us. Mr. Mike Godfrey, who is Principal Associate of International Economic Growth Division at Abt Associates in Bethesda. He has been there since September of last year, so he hasn't been there very long. But before that, he held many senior level positions in various organizations. He was with the Rainforest Alliance. He was there for several years, and his work really spanned about 15 countries and 25 projects that were involving sustainable farming practices for some critical cash crop, and doing so with a climate smart agriculture focus, if you will. He was also with the World Cocoa Foundation, and he was able, through a lot of the work that he did there, bring about an alliance of public-private organizations, including the U.S. government through USAID and 12 private companies to help with the cocoa sector, the cocoa industry in several countries in Africa. He was chief of party for a USAID program in Haiti, which is a country that's near and dear to the hearts of several of us at the Borlaug Institute. And before that, he was at DAI for 10 years, where he had a large portfolio of USAID projects. So he's been in many countries around the world. He was also with CARE International, holds a master's degree from Colorado State University. He's not too far from Texas. And his degree is in civil engineering. Also has a bachelor's degree in forest management from Utah State University. And we could not be more pleased to have Mike Godfrey here among us to bring his expertise and his perspective, and specifically using the example of South Sudan, a country that has been under so much conflict. It's a country of a lot of promise, and yet there seems to always be something going on that prevents that progress from continuing. But what he will tell us hopefully will bring a brighter light shining on that situation as well. So without further ado, Mr. Godfrey, welcome to Texas A&M.
Thank you, Dr. Morano. I'm privileged to be here. I greatly appreciate the invitation to talk about some of Apt's work, some of USAID's work in the leading agriculture domain, and particularly about South Sudan. And I know a lot of the Institute and Texas A&M staff have a strong connection with that country and its development. Before I get started, I'm supposed to say howdy?
Yes.
Howdy. Thank you. Again, it's fun. I had accepted the offer to speak on a topic dear to my heart, sustainable agriculture, and chose for this particular lecture to focus on our effort in South Sudan. We're completing our 5th year of work there for USAID in a very large, classical agriculture development, economic development program that focuses on productivity on the farm, farmer training, capacity building for farmer organizations, market development, and some work in the enabling environment so that works better for the betterment of the market. So without further ado, I think I'll jump right into it. Today's presentation, I'm going to start with the conceptual framework of resilience. Resilience is a theme that's it's growing in both not just use or application, but it's growing in the importance of the way, or in the unifying way that brings together multiple themes that look at agriculture in a post-conflict setting. I'll talk very briefly about context of South Sudan itself, a little bit of background on the USAID Farm Project and what it's doing and how it's doing it. Then I'd like to spend most of the time focusing on the project's resilience outcomes that were cast in a classical framework of agriculture development, economic growth, but have come to show immensely interlinked, interconnected outcomes in the resilience framework. And I would like to make talking about that intersection of peace building and resilience using the case of South Sudan and show the power of that construct and how important it is to understand it in these kinds of fragile country settings. So it's, in a way, how can an agriculture development project contribute just more than the sum of its individual parts of value chain, market development, and farmer productivity elements? And so I'll focus on that for the theme, the thesis of this presentation. What is resilience? I mean, there's a wealth of research and study and theory on resilience, and there's many who have looked at it in great depth. And I'll focus on one in particular as we move through this. But this slide says it best, I think, and it's similar to the variations I've read, and it's useful for our purposes because this is a USAID program, the case that I'm talking about. So the ability of people, households, communities, country, and systems to mitigate, adapt to, and recover from shocks and stresses in a manner that reduces chronic vulnerability and facilitates inclusive growth. And all of those adjectives, and there are many, and verbs are important because they do have a part of the resilience framework. In visual concept, this is about as simple as we can present it. You take the concept of resilience being a scale that runs from extremely vulnerable, exceptionally vulnerable. You build resilience through adding to the capital base of the community and the household and the society. It's natural capital, it's physical capital, it's human capital, financial, political, and social. And you begin, as you achieve results and outcomes in building that, you begin to establish a resilience. So in the very simple graph, a community could be on a trajectory for doing that, and at some point in time, a shock. In the case of Haiti, an earthquake. In the case of Somalia, extreme civil conflict. And then it loses capital in that. It's a stress. And the whole system, the whole society is set back because of that. But depending on their level of capital, their level of resilience, you can run the range of having a society that goes to collapse. And I think the case of Somalia, some would argue in the 90s that happened, to being throttled where it's trying to come back, it's not coming back better. And my personal experience would lead me to present Haiti as that example. It's trying mightily, but it's just not on the same trajectory it was before. Bounce back, we can think of the Indonesian tsunami and the Ring of Countries. And I had visited Banda Aceh 5 years after the tsunami, and it's general opinion that they are stronger, they are better, their systems, their warnings, their assets are much higher than they might have been on their previous trajectory. And finally, it bounced back better. I've also had personal experience working in agriculture in Kosovo during the conflict in '99. And there's an example of a society that has gained autonomy, if not independence. They have their road systems completely built back. They have, marketplaces, and they have educational systems. So they have definitely bounced back better. And that's what the concept of resilience is trying to capture. Now, this is, and I don't expect you to read this from the back row or even the front, this is the actual framework. And it talks about the different kinds of capital, the capacities for community action to resolve crises or bounce back from shocks. And you see the repeated human, financial, natural, etc. The kind of things like preparedness and self-organization and diversity and inclusion that would go far in mitigating extreme shocks. And it flows through, and you can see on the right that it comes back to those pathways, recover or not, and what degree. And this is actually taken from a document that's very important for the practice of resilience programming or understanding and working it into your efforts, the Community Resilience Conceptual Framework. A lot of this has been done by Dr. Tim Frankenberg at the University of Arizona State University and his organization called Tango, but it's built strongly and interlinked with theoretical and field work done by CARE International and DFID as well. So the takeaway from this slide only that there's a certain amount of complexity, and there's now a growing amount of rigor in evaluating resilience outcomes in these kinds of contexts. And any of you that have deep interest in this can refer to the literature, and there's just a wealth of very good studies and examples and the like. Just to underscore very briefly the last slide on the resilience concept, it's measurement. At the very, very top, what it's looking to quantify or qualify is the depth of poverty that the society either has risen out of or is shot back into by a particular stress. The prevalence of households with moderate to severe hunger, the prevalence of wasted children under 5 years of age. And this is an interesting one, and DFID and USAID hold this last one to be critically important. The humanitarian assistance needs normalized over time are going down, so that when they adjust for the severity of the shock, they're seeing that more resilient communities are requiring less foreign assistance to recover. Now, there's a whole set of Feed the Future indicators, analytical frameworks, sets of indicators, USAID standard, and optional indicators. This group here that's on the screen is just an example of the kind of indicators under each of the three resilience outcomes that USAID and others in the community is looking for: increased well-being, strengthened institutions, and improved nutrition and health status. And I won't repeat the indicators, but believe me, there are 15 or 20 more. And there are ongoing funded assessments of the resilience framework, ongoing in countries like Ethiopia, Bangladesh, and other places by Dr. Frankenberg and others that are trying to see just how meaningful this can be in a real life study. And these are longitudinal studies. That isn't a questionnaire in a day or two. These are big, rigorous impact evaluation designs, and they're meant to get to the bottom of how framework is actually delivering results. Let's switch a bit to the context of South Sudan. This particular slide, just to represent it geographically for those that may not know details of where South Sudan is. And I'm not going to take 5 minutes here to go through the full history of South Sudan. It's been there a very long time. You know, it gained its independence in 2001, and almost everything in between and since has been conflict. This is a deeply torn country. The social fabric has been disrupted in the deep past by neighboring ethnic groups, by Europeans, by Arabs, and then in the Sudan, North Sudan and South Sudan, and at times in the past they've been united and been now again separated. So the classic takeaway here is just to demonstrate that conflict is a very important consideration when you are doing programming in the country, economic development or humanitarian assistance. The precepts of do no harm and conflict mitigation rise to the top when you start talking about, you know, technology, innovation, and distribution, and the like. So it's important all the way around. This is starting to get, with this slide, the sociocultural context a little bit into what's very important for a project like the Farm Project to understand. That there are ethnicities that it's a multi-ethnic society, and there are many more than I named. And these run a little bit in the northeast to southwest, sort of the way I've listed them. And the Dinka being by far the largest group. But they are traditionally, historically, not always in agreement for the landscapes in their region. They fight frequently. There's potential that the current peace agreement could lapse, could break down again. There are so many languages. We find this in the Farm Project. There are probably 25 or 30 different languages in the zone where we're working. And that makes our work that much the tougher. It also makes community peace-building efforts all the tougher. It's a largely sedentary agro-pastoral farming area. There's a great deal of fishing along the Nile. The Nile is a considerable river that runs right through the heart of the project zone and creates the border between eastern Equatoria and central Equatoria. And I'll show you a different map in just a second. Transhumance still practiced, and this creates conflicts. There's quite a few pastoralists, traditional, that move into agro-pastoralist sedentary lands and can disrupt with their livestock range management practices that are not necessarily helpful to the sedentary populations. It's widely dispersed. As I noted, ethnic conflict continues. The project found out some interesting aspects of the households in the zone when we started up a few years ago and doing our surveys. I mean, there's not a tradition of living near a road. They like to locate their households fairly far from roads. And when we peeled back that a bit to understand why, they were targets of anyone that was moving through the zone. So being as far off the road was a coping strategy, a coping mechanism for the household. We also found out that they lived as far away from each other because agglomerations of households were, again, more likely for disruption with conflict. They had a practice of growing more cassava because cassava was something that could yield. And away from it, unlikely to be uprooted if somebody wanted to take their assets. And the final livelihood strategy we noted was they tended not to accumulate assets because they were easy to be taken away. So corn granaries and sacks of shelled groundnuts in the life were relatively rare. And this is the kind of context that the project is working in now. We're trying to change that. It's a little bit on the economic context. This is quite telling, you know, that $17 a month translates to less than $1 a day. It's the poverty levels are quite high. Go back to the depth of poverty is the top level indicator that organization moving the needle on. You want to see depth of poverty reduced. Another one that's interesting here is the mobile phone uptake. There are a lot of countries in East Africa, Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, where this is so much more higher. But in southern South Sudan, it's very dispersed. There are very few cell phone towers. There's limited use of cell phone technologies at the household. If there is, it tends to be the male head of household who takes it with him to the field when he goes off to work. So that the households, the use of cell phones is extremely limited. But this gives you an idea of the kind of people that we're working with. Now let's talk a bit about what I've been calling the Farm Project. Its actual title is the Food, Agribusiness, and Rural Markets Project. It started 5 years ago. And again, I note that some of the staff here in the room and in your institute and at Texas A&M have participated at different times in implementing this. So they're very familiar with the framework that was used to launch the Farm Project. As I said, there were three components that were stressed. It was productivity, trade and marketing, and capacity building. And there are subheadings of that underneath. So the project built itself around those three components. It actually focused originally on productivity because it had to start to create surpluses from that context I told you, where people didn't want to have assets and wanted to stay disconnected for coping strategy, right? So they focused on productivity, and they largely used improved food varieties. We'll talk about that in just a little bit, about as the major intervention, but also coupled with seed technologies was good agriculture practices training, which farmers learned how to hoe and clear and harrow and plant and use one seed in a drill plant instead of three, which reduces yield considerably by taxing the immediate soil around each of the individual plants. So this was the construct that was used to start Farm Project about 5 years ago. Here is the zone. And the map cuts off a great deal of the north of South Sudan, but this focuses, this allows us to focus on the exact region where we are working. And we are up against all those borders. And you know, at some parts, like over on where Uganda and the Congo meet, the roads we take are actually the border. It defines what side of the road is which country. South Sudan is divided into states. We work in 3 of them. We call them the Equatorias. We work in the west, closer to far up the border of the DR Congo. Central Equatoria, which includes the capital Juba, and East Equatoria, which borders more of Uganda and Kenya. In each of the 3 states, we work in 3 counties. The counties are kind of the lower level of real functional government. There is a state government, it's quite strong. There's a central government, a state government, and the local government. And in these counties, there's a presence. You can go see the county or district commissioner. You can meet the county agriculture extension staff. You can deal with their agents there. The next step down, Payam, is much more undeveloped, much more rural, with demarcation, except in the traditional sense. There is a leadership at the Payam level, but it's hard to use that avenue for development purposes. And the farm project works in 27 of the Payams in that area. The next lower step is the BOMA. This is small aggregations, single households. But BOMAs are the center that the farm project has used to organize farmers, to receive inputs, to receive gap training and the like. And through that structure, we're currently working in 2,000 farm households in those 27 high-end. Just for purposes, in the 3 Equatorial states, adjusting out urban population, looking only at the rural, there are about 350,000. And if we just look at the 9 counties, 50. So the farm project currently is addressing about, at the county level, about 8.5% of the potential households that could be receiving training on farming and the like, and a much less percent of the total state, about 3%. Project is implemented in partnership with Action Africa Help International, based out of Nairobi. They have a very big office in South Sudan. They do very competent community outreach work. They are the foot soldiers of the extension program. They have 40 staff that just work on the extension part, the good agricultural practice training and the farthest outreach to the communities and the farmers. Also work with RSM, which is a global security services. After the outbreak of violence in December of 2013, when everyone was evacuated and we were allowed back in May of 2014, we thought it wise to incorporate a steady, firm, dedicated security effort that works with the drivers and our physical assets, gives us information about where problems are in the country, which roads are closed, what to do, what not to do, and trains our staff into how to be sensitive to security problems. And then ACDI VOCA, they've worked with us for a long time on the RAISE Plus. They continue this as a RAISE Plus procurement vehicle that USAID uses for agriculture programs. They've been a dependable partner, and they tend to focus on the value chain marketing, cooperative part of the farm project. And then our main counterparts, and all those comments, it's actually one, Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Development, and then the state and county governments and agencies. Those are actually critical to us because we get a lot done at the local level with the endorsement and support of the county and state governments. They critically intervene on helping target areas. They do data collection. They do mapping. They ride shotgun on the extension teams. They're learning by doing with the program, so they're critical component. Staff about 90, and then back to this county Payam and BOMA structure. We work with and through 575 farmer-based organizations, and that's the BOMA level. So that's where all 13,000 reside, the participants. It's highly variable. It's anywhere from 10 to 30 participant members per FBO, and they're mixed. I mean, in some communities they're men. In some communities we have FBOs that are all women. In some they're mixed, but there are a few that are mixed. But there are some. Overall, women's participation in farm is about 40%, 40% of that 13,000 has been female-headed households or female practicing farmers that want to participate in it. We're very proud of that because it's a tough environment. Moving up the pyramid to the intermediate level, the cooperatives. We work with 145 different cooperatives. They touch more than the 575 farmer-based organizations. All our farmer-based organizations are members in some way, or most of them are, with a co-op. But the co-ops include other membership that we're not addressing through the farm projects. And then at the apex level are unions. And these are basically cooperatives of the cooperative society. And they reside mostly at the county level, where you have a sufficiently large group of farmers that you can bring them together under this kind of a structure. And these are the real targets of opportunity. They actually have bylaws, they have governance structures, they have boards that have been trained, some more skilled than others, in finance, in marketing, in warehousing, and things like this. And this is an incredibly large opportunity to take this pyramid of farmer organization and step it up a bit so we can move from 13,000 to 130,000 or something. This would be a key part of the equation. That's farm project in a peanut shell. Let's look at, now I told you at the beginning, the resilience framework. I talked about that in the farm project. Now let's talk about the farm project's outcomes in the resilience framework, because they're different than outputs just within the classic agriculture economic development. And I think they're very important to look at, and it reinforces the power of this kind of development paradigm being used and applied in the South Sudanese case. So the first of the six of capital, the human capital. And our biggest intervention here and our biggest success is the good agriculture practices training. Now these are life skills, these are learnings, these are knowledge that the farmer, male or female, can take with them for the rest of their life. This is building their own person. And they're doing this by self-selection. They come to these because they want to learn. This is important to understand. Okay, great. What does that do inside the resilience framework? Well, it definitely increases access to food, which is one part of the equation for food security, and availability, which is the second. Farm is not currently addressing the nutrition utilization component of food security. We've been focused on the agriculture side, but there are humanitarian programs that focus only on the nutritional use of food. And that is something that many in the community, and I think USAID would like to see better brought into agriculture programs, is the nutritional aspect, and how the efficiency of utilization, and how food becomes human well-being. Social outcomes, part of social capital. There are three components to social capital. I won't go into them now, but the bonding, the bridging, and the link is between people, between communities, and then networks of communities. And we think that the model used in developing this is quite powerful, because it does lay a foundation for collaborative effort in the village, among villages, and within the small regions. And that is what social capital is: getting people to work together, support each other, so that shocks can be absorbed and dispersed out through a network or out through a set of partners. They're as committed to their development as anyone. And we feel that this is an incredibly strong outcome that you don't think of when you build a traditional agriculture development project like farm. Natural capital. This is the stewardship of the landscape. So part of the GAP training is soil and water conservation. There's much more than these four, contour plowing, timing of clearing and weeding and things like this. It's all about the stewardship and restorative farming so that it's done in a way that actually strengthens the environment around you instead of depletes it at such a rate. The second part of natural capital, improve seed varieties. And I only listed four here, but Long V5 maize is drought tolerant. It's quality protein maize, which helps especially infants metabolize protein. K132 bean is very popular. It cooks quickly, very tasty, and it grows fast. Cerelo is a kind of sorghum that's popular in the region, resistant to pests and birds. And maize 14 is a mosaic-resistant cassava that we've introduced. All of these actually help reduce the pressure for extensification, which is good for the environment as well. Financial capital. I've got a shot on the screen there. Three of the most remunerative activities within the zone right now, and they work at all levels. They work with farmer-based organizations, at the co-ops and the co-op unions, but the women selling product from the household in these weekly markets is very strong, and they bring that income back into the family, and we've seen that increasing. The young gentleman is operating a cassava chipper. Chipped cassava it's an endless demand, and there's little supply. It's not an easy journey, but it's agriculture enterprise, and it's very popular. We've introduced these machines, and we can't keep supplies of them going fast enough because it's a cassava-based diet, and they like the stuff, and this is a big part of it. So sacks and sacks of it when you go to one of our co-op unions warehouses, and then of course horticulture, in this case cabbage. They universally, when I talk to the farmer-based organization members, cabbage was a real moneymaker. It grows extremely well on that soil, which is very fertile. It's relatively disease resistant, and it commands a high price in the local markets. So these kinds of income-generating, parallel activities are strongly build the financial capital. The linking to markets and doing this through development group and cooperatives as enterprises is also a significant plus. Physical capital is where we work the least in farm. We don't build roads, and we don't really do the aggregation centers and warehouses. We've done a few. There's large demand for a modern, concrete pad with a tin roof over it as an aggregation road. Women and men can bring product and wait for the transport to come along out of the rain and the elements. The co-ops and the co-op unions are all looking for warehousing. There have been other donors that built some, and they've been very well used. We do work a lot on improved and post-harvest loss reduction, and that's physical capital. And so you see an example there of a maize silo. And we do actually work very hard in getting information out through mobile telephony, and that is actually growing quickly in the staff for both its monitoring and evaluation purposes, but also in the community of Southern Sudan for market information. We're trying to build that up. This is, what can we say about Texas and agriculture and politics? When you can get, and this is out to your state agriculture fair, tending to drive a tractor and looking at tubers, you're building political capital. He remembers this, and he knows what side the votes are on if they vote in South Sudan anytime soon. State agricultural fairs, and that's a photo of it, are just fabulous venues to bring the county governments and the farmers, and they show their produce. And everybody here has probably been to an agriculture fair. They can be really interesting. Lots of information, whether you're a farmer or whether you're a procurer of the commodity or whether you sell all this very cool place. And just think, and these are extremely, we've done many of them in each of them. Lastly, World Food Program has started to become a committed buyer of surplus grains, mostly the maize and beans, and some cassava, for their, it's called Purchase for Progress program, where they commit to not importing food from a foreign donor, but buying it from locally productive areas and redistributing it. And Sudan is a wonderful case where the southern parts of South Sudan are a breadbasket, and the north are constantly threatening food security from famine and flood and conflict. So the WFP, through a huge grant from the Gates Foundation, has committed capital to local purchase program. We think that that's capital because political capital, because when you have these groups connected to the UN, the information is flowing, the relationships are being built and the like. Next steps, and I'll be very quickly here because I believe the time is running out. I want to have a chance for questions. There's a lot that needs to be done for South Sudan's farming systems and agriculture. That framework and those results that I present for farm need to be assessed. The technologies, is there a better bean than K132 or longy maize corn? You know, is the tin silo better than the corn crib that we've helped improve also? We have those kinds of assessments and evaluations going on. Farmer extension at scale. We as some of you who are very close to the Texas State, agriculture extension system know, taking individual technically competent people all the way out to the farm gate is expensive. And they don't get huge numbers. It's a very expensive proposition. It's the same in Africa. And those, I told you, 40 AAHI field extensionists, they're at their maximum and they're reaching the 13,000. But we have to find a way to do more. Maybe with ICT, maybe with mass media, maybe with some novel form at a bigger scale. Seed production, we're currently the seed technology package through commercial procurement from neighboring countries. We bring in, they take foundation and breeder seed and breeder and foundation seed and turn it into hybrid. We buy that and distribute it. A few of them are open pollinated varieties that will continue to regenerate for 2 or 3 years, but then begin. Future of South Sudan's farming will depend on creating a local capacity for seed replication and seed production. Cooperative formation. This is bringing people together. They do sit and have meetings and argue about who's going to get elected to the board and should they plant a field together of cassava to sell on the market. These are very good in conflict resolution, peace building activities. Market infrastructure, post-harvest storage. Aflatoxin is a big concern in maize and groundnuts in South Sudan. And the WFP is testing for both aflatoxin and moisture levels before they procure seed from our groups. And there's a lot more that needs to be done, specifically in the warehousing arena. Market infrastructure I touched upon already. Information systems, we're working on that, but there are so many novel platforms that could be tested, evaluated, that can serve the rural areas. The one concern there would be adaptation of mobile technology by our rural areas not very high. Enabling environment, finding county agriculture services can definitely be strengthened. How to do so sustainably is a real challenge. They are resource consumptive, and even having them as collaborative partners right now takes funds, takes, you know, operational funds to keep them involved. So that's stop there. That's a little bit about South Sudan, about the resilience framework, about the traditional agriculture project that we call farms agribusiness. I'm sorry, food agribusiness and rural markets, and how it all comes together in the resilience paradigm. And so I'll take questions. Or Dr. Ronald?
Yes.